So hello again. Tonight we're going to talk about listening to meteors and how it's not that difficult and people can do it if they're interested enough to doing it. So what do I mean by listening? Um, yes, you can't typically hear audibly meteors. Human ears are just not sensitive enough, except when you get the crack and boom of a bolide. That's a meteor that explodes due to atmospheric pressure. Or when one vaporizes, you might get to hear the sizzle of it. Turns out if you get a sensitive enough set of omnidirectional microphones, and they work over a broad frequency from subsonic through ultrasonic, you basically put a stick up with an array of microphones, including the top. You can record meteors, and you need a lot of computer processing to remove the background noise, the general stuff that you don't think about. You know, how often do you hear aircraft going overhead or trucks on the streets or cars going by, or sometime if the wind is just right, you'll actually hear a highway that might be a few miles away, but due to the concrete walls on the side of the highway and the wind blowing in your direction, you get to hear all the road noise. So you would have to remove all of that stuff. And then the things we just take for granted, frogs and crickets and insects and animals and stuff that are just natural in nature, you'd have to have the computer software remove that. And then what you're left with is maybe some constant noises that you never knew were there or never paid attention to. But the three different things that should be left after you take all that other junk out is some minor bolides, things that went small amplitude boom that you never saw, they never made bright lights, or the sizzling and popping of vaporization of that you just never noticed because it was too low. And then maybe some unusual sounds that you never knew were there, but you wouldn't know until you did them. But that's a separate project for another day. The do-it-yourselfers can have a field day with that one. What about seeing meteors? Well, yeah, it's possible to see meteors. How about in the daytime? Well, you need special kinds of equipment to be able to see them in the daytime. And you're certainly not going to see them in the daytime with your human eyes. You would need to know where to look at, where to look, in what direction to look. And typically you'll look for a dark site that's not light polluted, and you do it during a new moon where, not a lot of light in the sky. And you'd wait until late at night, well before dawn, but well after sunset, so the sun's kind of on the backside of the Earth. I do know people that get a wide field of view, low light camera. They'll just record 180 degrees by 360 degrees, and then they'll run software on it and go back and look at meteors that occurred that you never knew were there. But your skies have to be dark enough to see it. But what they do is they lean more towards the infrared, and they use special lenses and filtering, and maybe even Peltier cooling of the sensor to make it more sensitive. And then they can see even more things that you wouldn't normally see visually. But given that something burning up and vaporizing can make emanations in other portions of the spectrum ultraviolet, but you'd need special lenses and filtering for that. But once again, because of other light sources for the detection, to take a long recording and find where the individual meteors are showing up, you'd need that. But I think you can probably find video processing for that. Like I said, another project for another day by all the do-it-yourselfers. I'm assuming the do-it-yourselfers crowd would include people watching this video on YouTube later going, I hadn't thought about that. But we're going to talk about tuning into meteors, as in this is the kind of hear that I'm referring to. So we're going to be listening into the radio portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. And when you do that, you can actually pick up meteors in the daytime and at night, and maybe even when the weather's foul. So, radio waves will pass through fog and clouds, whereas visual won't. Now, there may be radio frequency interference. So if you pick a particular frequency you want to listen to meteors on, there may be a local radio station or some piece of equipment that's producing radio noise, or, fluorescent light ballasts. But the kind of antenna you typically use is something called a discone. the picture on the right is a discone. And it's one of a variety of discones. And where it gets the name discone is the flat array of radials. That's the disc. And then the ones that come down like a triangle, that's the cone. So it's a disc cone. It's a design of a wide band antenna, so it can receive over a very broad range of frequencies. And as you can tell by it being symmetrically and circular, it's omnidirectional. It doesn't care which direction the radio comes from. And you can use our favorite USB dongle, the software-defined radio, to tune in on it. So you would need something that could receive it as raw signal. You wouldn't want to say, well, I'm only listening to FM. Well, no, you want to listen to the raw analog signal. And you need something that supports what is known as fast Fourier transform, and we'll get into that on the next slide, and something called a waterfall display, and be able to record it so you can show proof to others that, yes, I can record meteor showers. So FFT. In mathematics, there's a thing called a Fourier series. And under software, you can have an algorithm that will quickly optimize the Fourier series without running a lot of terms that won't make any significant difference. And that kind of clips off the series. So it's a fast Fourier transform. A Fourier series is nothing more than you take a pattern of data and then you factor it through trigonometric values. So it's n times sine of some value raised to a particular power. And that's, you add those together. And as the number gets smaller and smaller and smaller, you can increase the accuracy of translation of the waveform. So the waveform starts out kind of rough and bumpy, and eventually it'll take over whatever shape you need it to do. So we're going to take a series of radio samples which measure frequency over time. And we're going to use the FFT to flip that, change domains so that we get amplitude and frequency flipped over time. You then take that data and you'll have horizontally the frequency of the radio signal, and then this thing scrolls downward over time. So you would have the value as it changes over time, making the lines, and then the color and brightness of the particular spot is the amplitude, or how strong the signal is. So if you see this picture down here, you see a lot of vertical straight lines. Those are either continuous tones or high data rate computer modulated data. So it's changing too fast for you to hear it or notice it easily. And then you have like voice traffic, and voice traffic has all of these splotchy, colory things in it. And it's because as people speak, there are gaps, and those gaps are reduced energy in the signal, and therefore the frequency changes because you need a certain bandwidth to cover all the highs and lows of the speech pattern, and it gets bright and dim or colorful and monochrome, and then you have gaps, and that's where the speaking pauses, or the speaking picks up, or there's a loud portion. That's this waterfall display. There are things that do this same sort of thing, like when you have a particular frequency going by and a meteor comes through and its electromagnetic emanations will distort that signal. So you'll pick up a distorted signal, so you'll see that your normally recognizable pattern changes. Or pulsars. If you're listening to a pulsar, the cycling of the pulsar will make these diagonal lines periodically down your continuous waterfall. A meteor crossing the atmosphere does produce radio signals directly, but they're very low amplitude, and depending upon what type of material is being vaporized as it crosses the atmosphere, the frequency, because if you think about it spectroscopically speaking, different elements excite different wavelengths. So if you don't know in advance where it's coming from, and you don't know in advance what kind of material is being vaporized, you won't know what frequency to tune into. That's the no carrier version. And you need much more capable equipment to do that kind of thing, because it's, got to be continuously receiving over the whole sky on a very wide set of frequencies and then you have software that goes in and finds the patterns. There's an easier way to do that. That's the carrier mode of reception, where you have a particular frequency that's always being transmitted by a radio transmitter on Earth. And it's a particular frequency that gets up into the ionosphere, and it will bounce off the ionosphere. And this is a continuous tone, and until the meteor coming into the atmosphere distorts the ionosphere, distorts the reflected signal, all you need to do is know the frequency of the carrier, the tone, and you can watch for changes in the tone. And you can watch for the changes in your waterfall display, because you'll have one of those nice straight lines, and all of a sudden it'll get a little splatter, a little bit of diagonal in it. So you can see the frequency shift and the amplitude change. And if you're listening to it, you can also hear that the carrier tone might be a lower frequency, and all of a sudden it gets higher for a second and it goes back down again. But where do you get the carrier from? There used to be a very convenient carrier known as the front porch of TV signals. Back when there was analog television, each one of the TV signals in analog had an envelope. The TV signal had what is known as an envelope. That was the structure of the video signal to say, okay, here's the start of a video refresh frame, and then here's the individual lines of the display, and then here's the retrace back up to the top. And it would do that 60 times a second. In NTSC, you would have field 1 and field 2, and it would interlace them. So you could look for this beginning of structured video signal frame as the front porch, and it was always at the same frequency. So you'd pick a particular TV channel and you'd tune in to the front porch carrier, and you could see Meteor coming in and distorting that, and now you can do it. But since we got rid of analog TV signals and digital is so compressed, there's no convenient front porch to look for anymore. So there have been radio astronomy groups saying, let's create our own carrier. So they're reaching out to organizations like the FCC and saying, we would like to allocate particular frequencies for carrier for observing meteor showers. And so they've been given tentative approval. So there's some pilot projects in the Southwest to create a continuous tone signal in an unused portion of the spectrum that is reserved for radio astronomy. And the Society of Amateur Radio Astronomers, one of their special interest groups, is focusing on observing meteors in radio. So if you can find a carrier, what you do is you tune to the center of that carrier. You adjust your bandwidth to be a little bit wider than the actual carrier. So if the carrier gets distorted, you can see how far it gets distorted without cropping the signal. You set your sampling rate to the best possible for the computer you're using. You set your demodulation to raw. It's not going to try and pull any voice or radio signals or music out of it. You turn on your waterfall display. You set the scroll rate so it doesn't go by too fast or too slow. And you set the fast Fourier transform precision, how many bits of data to process, to 16 bits, because 8 bits just won't show you enough change. And then you set the sensitivity color for the amplitude to be able to show you small changes up to large changes, so you can exaggerate the effect on the carrier. You set your gain to manual, and then you just crank up the amplifier. And then you set your audio output so that you don't go cuckoo. You set the audio down low enough where you can hear it. You disable the squelch. The squelch is the thing that says, you get rid of all that white noise in the background, and all you want to hear is like people talking. So you set the squelch up, and it clips off and on as people talk. Now, you need to disable that because you don't want to be clipping off your carrier when it starts to get distorted. You start your reception, and then you can record it. And the reason why I'm not showing you a particular piece of software like SDR Sharp is there are other pieces of software that people use, and when they watch this video, I don't want it to be like, well, you just got to push this button, then set it to this value, then click here, and then perfection. Like that's no way to learn anything. Plus, it means it'll only work with one kind of software. So, you may be using GNU SDR, or SDR Sharp, or SDR Play, or any number of things. But if you're thinking about how does this thing work? Well, you've got a transmitter, you've got your carrier signal that's going up to the ionosphere. Normally it would bounce down and you'd pick it up at your receiver. And when the meteor goes by, it distorts the ionosphere layer, which distorts the bounce of the signal, which means your receiver is going to detect it. This other picture here, the one on the right, is something that I think most people don't pay attention to, which is when the Earth in its orbit around the sun is going through the debris field of a comet that passed by previously, the meteoroids that are trailing the Earth will never catch up with it because the Earth is moving faster than they can catch up. So the direction you generally want to point your radio is towards the sun before it comes up. So that's where the Earth is plowing into the meteoroids that are like either not moving fast enough to get out of the way of the Earth or they're heading towards the Earth. So that's where you're going to catch more meteor impacts. And here's an example of a spectrum at the top. You see it's just a little blip in energy, but then further down you see, and there's the waterfall. So you can see that they were looking at, I think it was between 960 and 1200 hertz. That's their bandwidth. And then they were looking at a particular carrier, and the carrier, you see how it takes this diagonal bend? That's because the frequency gets shifted by the distortion in the ionospheric layer. But you can not only see individual meteors if they're spread out far enough, but you can catch storms of them, creating a continuous effect. Interesting watching. But if you don't want to spend the money for the hardware and getting the software set up and you're not into that kind of thing, then you can essentially do it at no cost because you don't need the hardware, you don't need the antenna, you don't need the receiver, you don't need the software, you don't need to learn how it all works. You can just go to, there are websites that do meteor observing and you can watch it while it observes meteor showers. So pick a time during a meteor shower when the shower would be facing the direction of wherever that site is on the planet and pick up meteors. And for those people that want instant gratification, there's a YouTube channel called Live Meteors Live Stream. And what they do is they record meteor showers and then they post-process the video and put it up on their YouTube site. So if you want to know what a meteor shower looks like on radio, you can go there after we get done with this discussion. Now, as to whether it's still going to be up there a year from now, all these things are shoestring operations and they work from whatever funding they get, whatever time they have available. And if their day job is how the money comes in and puts food on the table, then they might stop. But you can go out there and look for them. So in conclusion, listening to meteor showers passing through the atmosphere by way of distortions using a known carrier is a form of entertainment for some people. For people that enjoy watching, live streaming TV channels, maybe not so much. The interesting thing is, if you're listening in radio, even at night, you're going to be able to pick up more meteors than you can with your eyeballs, even if it's a fairly dark site, because you're picking up things in radio that may not be visual. They're too high, they're too dim, they're too quick. Maybe they're sort of towards your horizon where the air is thicker and swampier and you just won't see it. So if you're talking about how many meteors per hour did you detect, you're going to detect more of them in radio than you're going to detect visually. And you don't need a dark site, or maybe even you don't need clear skies if you're listening to a frequency that isn't affected by clouds or rain. If you're going to directly receive them yourself, then yeah, you do need an antenna and an SDR and there's free software for running the software reception. If you've gone out and looked for a meteor shower at a somewhat light polluted site and went, how many meteors did you see? Well, we were there for 3 hours and I saw 2 meteors. I don't get the big deal about meteor showers. Well, if you listen to them in radio, you might see 50 meteors per hour. And so that difference might broaden your mind, your thoughts, concerning the planet's vulnerability to impacts by near-Earth objects like meteors and asteroids and comets. So once again, a little bit of science, a little bit of paying attention, maybe you get the bigger picture. And then lots of links, because as usual, I did lots of research. So I knew it was going to be a short one. Comments, questions?
Very nice.
Well,
We always worry about the technology that expands our senses. We don't trust what we don't see or hear. So,
well, yeah, there are people that, until I can see it, I don't believe it exists.
yeah, right.
Well, let's see. If it's infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays, infrasonic, ultrasonic, your body will never, ever observe that directly.
It's not intuitive, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it sure opens the mind how vulnerable we are, our little planet.
Yes, that's the thing. And there are people that say, the Earth was hit by an asteroid in Arizona, what was it, 160,000 years ago? I got nothing to worry about. And then you have the other people saying, when the big one comes, kiss your ass goodbye because there's a damn thing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Why
yeah.
worry?
So they become agnostic to it. Me, I look at it as I want to know as much about the universe that I exist in as possible, because sentient life is the universe getting to know itself.
Sagan.
Yes. So,
if somebody heard something really unusual in one of these meteor sounds, would it be like the movie Don't Look Up? Nobody would believe them?
well, it involves science, so there are people that will not believe them, regardless of what's going on. If you look in Don't Look Up, the reason why it's Don't Look Up is even when it was there, plain as day in the sky, in the daytime, people just couldn't believe that it was that.
Yeah.
So, there will always be doubters, people that will say things like, they'll never make that Tesla Cybertruck. Never, ever, ever. Like they started delivering them. It'll never get more than 200 miles range. It's got 320 miles range. It'll always take hours to give it any kind of charging at the station. It can get 125 miles in 15 minutes of charge. There'll always be people that I think they almost feel comfortable doubting what is reality, because then they don't have to ponder it. They don't have to consider the effects of it. If all of a sudden you realized how many tons of meteoric debris falls upon the Earth daily, that's micrometeoroid stuff. But there's larger than micrometeoroid stuff that is also falling on the Earth every day, and you just can't see it.
They got some new car that as you drive down the road, it charges itself.
There is a pilot project, I think it's in Michigan, where they put, if you've ever experienced charging your cell phone contactless, like you don't have to plug anything in, you just lay your cell phone down here and it charges itself. There's a company wanting to do that with electric vehicles. You put two charging loops on the bottom side of your electric vehicle, and as you drive down the road charges your vehicle. And it's another one of those things that I looked at that technology and I went, there's a number of just physics impracticalities for that, because if the car is driving 15 miles an hour, then it has a long enough persistence over a charging coil to get some power out of it. If the car is driving down the highway at 65 miles an hour, the coils would have to have an enormous amount of energy in them to give your car any amount of boost as you cruise over, a coil that's maybe 6 feet by 6 feet in a fraction of a second. And then how do we send you the bill? Because all those coils got to cost somebody some money and the electricity for it. So sometimes things are readily recognizable as impractical without a lot of forethought. But you have to be a systems-minded person or a big picture person to quickly realize It's not how it could go wrong. It's just why it's just not practical. Kind of like hydrogen-powered cars. I mean, people talk about how few electrical power stations there are for electric vehicles. Imagine how few hydrogen filling stations there are.
Yeah, but if you had a steam-powered car, all you need was water.
Something has to heat the steam.
Well, yeah.
And that's generally a fossil fuel. You could have an enormous magnifying lens on the top of your car and use the heat from the sun to boil the water. But what do you do when the sun's not out? How would your car drive at night? Sometimes there are technologies that the physics does work, the electronics do work. They're just impractical for large-scale deployment. That's why the most practical way to power an electric vehicle is quantum energy.
Whoa.
Virtual photons, which is why I'm working on a Casimir piezoelectric battery. It's not a battery, it's a power generation cell. You just let it sit there and it generates power from nothing. Well, that can't work. You might want to talk to some theoretical quantum physicists who will tell you that stuff happens, 24/7, 365 all the time. That's how stuff works. So why not take advantage of it? I was watching a YouTube video about a globe that sits on a pedestal and it rotates continuously without any source of electrical or battery power. What it is, it's a globe inside of a globe. The outer globe is clear. The inner globe is a picture of the Earth, globe of the Earth. And then sitting between the two layers is two different materials of translucent liquid. You have mineral oil in the bottom and water in the top, and the globe will displace the mineral oil, but only so far. So the globe won't sink to the bottom of the mineral oil, and it just floats, almost a zero friction bearing. And then inside the Earth globe, there are solar cells, and it picks up ambient light. And then in the top of the globe on the inside, it has a magnet and coils. And it literally is using the Earth's magnetic field like a compass to turn the globe. So this thing will work essentially forever. And because it runs on so little power, you don't need to shine a light on it. Just ambient room light will make it turn. They make these in Earth globes and in moon globes. And that's the kind of thing you want to show at a museum, because
that's fascinating.
If people walk up to it, they'll just go, it's a turning Earth. If kids walk up to it, they'll go, well, where's the power cord? There isn't one. Oh, it's got batteries on the inside. This thing will run forever without ever changing any batteries.
This is fascinating.
And then their mind starts working and you go, how do it do that? And then you can explain sphere within sphere, oil, water, solar cells, coils, magnet, Earth's magnetic field, one Gauss. And then they will think about things, and maybe someday in the future, they'll invent a technology where cars' batteries are automatically, repowered by physics, by quantum physics. You don't need a car that can go 300 miles on a charge. You need a car that can go 75 miles on a charge. And then you sit it in a parking lot for an hour and it starts to charge itself back up automatically.
That slows down your trip, though. It slows you down. You're trying to get somewhere.
Why would it slow you down?
Because you got to stop every once in a while.
Don't you stop at traffic lights?
Not me.
And when you get to your destination, don't you park your vehicle and go inside for 15 minutes to an hour?
Oh, yeah.
You do, your car charges up some more. So even 75 miles of range on the batteries would be more than enough, because you're going to come home, park it out in front of the house or park it in the garage, and while it's just sitting there, it's going to start charging itself back up again from the quantum field. So, yeah.
I know electric cars have regenerative braking, but what about if you use the shock absorbers as well? So bumpy roads, would allow cars to go further on an electric charge.
Well, the downside of that is the suspension on electric vehicles is not pneumatic, it's electrical. So they're constantly energizing coils to keep the car running smoothly. And yes, any vibration or shock to the suspension system does actually make the coils work harder.
Oh, so bumpy roads use
Bumpy
more
roads actually
electricity.
consume more electricity.
Ah,
Yeah. But the Tesla vehicles do benefit from regenerative braking. And in fact, the Tesla Semi, if you're out in California and you're going up and down mountain roads, it gets big time assistance from, regenerative braking going down the downside of the hill. So if you're driving from a plateau to the downside, and then you go into the depot, you get charged up overnight, and then you drive up and you're at the other side. Yeah, that's how you drive 1,000 miles a day, is you get a little bit of boost charge somewhere along the way, and you use regenerative braking to repower things. And I saw where on the Cybertruck, in the software, they found a way to make it where you no longer disable regenerative braking, because people used to complain that it made the car stop too fast. You put your foot on the pedal to make the car brake, and it slows down too quickly. Well, don't push so hard with your foot on the pedal. And then they came up with a new form of regenerative braking that is slow to stop. So you set how aggressive it is, and when you take your foot off the gas, it will let it coast for a little while, but then it starts to slow down slowly and then more increasingly. So there are Tesla drivers called 1-foot drivers. They never touch the brake because they're doing city traffic stuff. They just touch the accelerator. And they know where to let off the accelerator to start the decline to 0 miles per hour and stop at a traffic light, which is crazy. But the regenerative braking on the Cybertruck apparently takes it to another level and gets back even more power from it. If you remember, I don't know, a long time ago, not that long ago for us, but a long time ago, there were these things called rotating hard disks, where your computer had a hard disk and it would spin, and when you power down the computer, the disk drive would stop in like 1 second. Guess what, folks?
What?
They never used mechanical brakes on those, because that would cause too much vibration, which could make the plates rattle and make the head bounce and destroy the disk drive. They used regenerative braking in a complete closed loop. So because they know they wanted to get to 0 RPM as quickly as possible. So when the drive is spinning and then you shut down the drive or you power off the drive, it had an onboard coil that would flip the polarity, and all the regenerative electricity generated by the spinning platters would go right back into a loop that would turn itself on itself. So as long as it was spinning fast, it had more energy to slow itself down. So it would it would go from like 7,200 RPM to 0 RPM in less than a second. But you're not talking about a huge amount of mass. But that's how they stop hard drives, is closed loop regenerative braking to 0 RPM.
No kidding.
Yeah. So when I see that electric vehicles have regenerative braking, but they've still got like physical brakes, I looked into it. You know why they still have physical brakes? NHTSA, that government agency that says cars have always had physical brakes. So I don't care if it's an EV. I don't care if it does regenerative braking down to 0. It's still got to have physical brakes just in case. Well, the problem they ran into was, if I've got to have physical brakes, that means I have to have brake fluid and a brake fluid pumping system and master cylinders and just all kinds of crap that an electric vehicle should never need.
Yeah, but you still have the guy who cuts you off and you got to hit the brake in a hurry. You know,
Didn't you just hear me say that I can take a 7,200 RPM
yeah,
hard drive and
yeah.
stop it to 0 in 1 second or less?
Uh,
If I maxed out regenerative braking on electric vehicles, I could smack your head into the windshield.
oh, good. I'd like that.
So, regenerative braking will be far more effective than mechanical friction brakes.
Mm.
But we don't let them go full because they'd be too aggressive. And NHTSA says, thou shalt have brakes that wear out, because then all those automobile repair shops get to sell you brake pads, brake realignment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
You don't need any of that.
But in
crap
the meantime,
without
you've added
properly
a bunch
built.
of weight to the car.
Yes. Yes. That's always a great concept, is you add weight to a vehicle to stabilize its center of gravity during braking.
What kind of brakes do airplanes have?
Mechanical brakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, aside from the reverse thrusters.
Yes. Well, they couldn't come to a stop if they didn't have reverse thrusters.
Yeah.
There's just too much mass, and the brake surface area is too small, despite having 16 tires.
But I wonder if they couldn't figure out some new technology without a mechanical brake.
I would say when
Parachute.
electric airplanes get into production, they're going to have regenerative braking, which will improve the reliability and reduce the maintenance cost of the airliner.
Yeah.
Because if you ever see a big jet landing, the smoke that you see is not only from the tires hitting the asphalt, because they pre-spin the tires to make it where they don't scrape as much, but they also spray water onto the brake pads
Oh,
to make the brake pads not explode into flames. It's a rocket launch. You gotta have that acoustic water pressure dampening.
Did you see there was a news story? I didn't see the whole thing. A battery company has come out with an electric car battery that charges much faster than the Tesla batteries, and it's a solid state battery. Did you see any details on that?
Solid state batteries, I put in the same category as fusion power any day now. Because
they're saying they came out with it already.
You don't see them in production volumes. You see them in test programs and pilots and prototypes, and because in order to have a solid state battery, the solid state aspect of it means there's no gel, there's no liquid. That's all the solid part is. It's solid. Okay. In order to have a solid state battery, you have to change the battery chemistry. And when you change the battery chemistry to be solid state, it has to be more energetic. And they draw upon things like zinc and aluminum to make them solid state. And zinc and aluminum aren't as rechargeable as often as lithium iron phosphate. So while they may accept the charge faster, they may not discharge as fast, so you can't get as much power out of them. And they don't last as long under continuous recharging to maximum power. So they have their limitations, which is why they haven't hit mainstream. In fact, Tesla actually bought a company that was touting the benefits of solid-state battery technology. And the core technology people were invited to do something else at Tesla, and they left. And Tesla is now looking at a different company to try a different approach to solid-state cathodes and anodes to see if maybe there's something to be done with it, but they're still sticking with the lithium iron phosphate as the predominant, safest means of doing it, and cylindrical metal enclosed cells as opposed to polymer enclosed plastic cells, pouch cells. So battery technology's come a long way. The prices of how many dollars does it cost per kilowatt hour of battery has dropped considerably, but it's still a burden given how much you have to have in a vehicle in order to make all of the range anxious folks not so range anxious. But that belies the fact that economy cars, subcompacts, have not had 400 miles on a tank for a lot of years. They have like 250 miles on a tank, but people don't consider that as a problem because it's a daily driver. You know, they can go for 2 or 3 days and not have to fill up. And you know, if you only have to fill up once a week, nobody worries about it. If you have to fill up multiple times a week, it's a problem. Well, I don't drive that much. I fill up once a month, but I have a 15 mile per gallon giant SUV with a 28-gallon tank. Yeah, when I go to fill up my tank from empty, it's a pain. I notice that, you know, closing on $4 a gallon gas, very much so, and I find cheaper gas. But yeah, if you have a battery-powered vehicle or you have quantum power cells that you've mixed in with the batteries, you use the batteries for your instant power and you use the quantum power cells to automatically recharge your battery as the car just sits there for a while. As long as you've got the batteries for your immediate acceleration and for whatever immediate distance you need. You know, if you're going to the grocery store, you don't need 400 miles of range if the car will charge itself. You might need 20 miles. You know, if you've got that Walmart out in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles. If you're a city dweller, you've got, 5-6 miles. So you don't need a huge battery if it'll recharge itself.
All right, I'm looking at the article. It's QuantumScape, and a lot of it says promises to blah, blah, blah. So
Yes.
yeah, it's not in full production. Okay,
No,
thanks.
no. When you see the likes of a GM, Ford, Stellantis, or Tesla actually putting it in place in volume production vehicles,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
probably proven itself in manufacturability, reliability, longevity, cost to produce, cost to maintain, cost to operate. And lithium iron phosphate has done that versus lithium nickel metal hydride batteries, the normal lithium ion batteries. Someday they'll connect the dots and go, so if we take this quantum physics stuff and we mix that in with piezoelectric, which, we know that stuff works. By the way, when you step on the pedal in your vehicle, you're actually using piezoelectricity to measure how much force you're putting on the pedal. So I've never heard of this stuff before. Well, go in your bathroom, get your digital scale out, stand by it.
Right.
That's piezoelectric technology.
Yeah.
So it exists. It's in mass volume production. It's used every day. It's a thing. It's just using it for a particular purpose. Yeah, I had, when I was doing the hotel internet company 20 years ago, because I had pallet loads of stuff that I was working all the time for deliveries and for trade shows, I got tired of having to drive to the local moving and storage company and paying them money to just weigh pallets. I have to take it in a vehicle on a forklift, hand forklift jack, pull it off, put it on their scale, weigh it. Thank you very much, $50. Like, no. So I found a place that would sell me a used pallet scale that could weigh up to, I think it was 2 tons. And it used 4 piezoelectric pods that would produce voltage, and then it would average that and produce a digital value as the weight. Buy it once, use it forever. So I guess we're done for tonight. Any comments or questions? So if there's anything that we're doing on the Saturday night sessions or otherwise that you want to ask about, or you want to suggest a change to, or how we do things, or why aren't we doing this instead of that, or you've got my email address. Just shoot me an email if you want to do it offline. Otherwise, during the end of the session before we stop recording. Okay, enough about that. And let's see. Let me stop recording.